Hi, I'm Natalie, owner of the Sewing Studio, and today in our classroom we are making easy placemats. It's a fun, short little project and one that I really wanted to share with you. So let's go take a look at what we need to get started. So the materials that we'll use for this project are really what make it fast and easy. So we're going to start with the mini charm packs from Moda. They're already cut in 2.5-inch squares. If you don't have the mini charm packs, then you'll just need to cut your fabric down to 2.5-inch squares before starting. Then we'll need some of the Easy Piecing grid from Ten Sisters. It's marked off in 2.5-inch squares, which make it really fast and easy for us to sew this all at once. For 2 placemats, you're going to need 1/2 yard of backing fabric and batting to go with that. And then you'll need about 1/3 yard for the binding strips on 2 placemats. So let's go start putting it together. So to get our placemat started, we're going to take our Ten Sister grid panel and actually trim off the outside and cut it in half because each of the panels makes 2 placemats. For those of you that have not seen the Ten Sister grid panels before, they're a fusible interfacing. So what's going to make this nice is that we're going to place all of our squares on the interfacing with the fusible side up, and then we're actually going to take a hot iron and actually fuse all of our little 2.5-inch squares to this panel so that we can sew down all of the lines vertically and then horizontally to get them all together at once. So we're not actually going to sew each square together individually, we're actually going to do it all at one time, which is what's going to make this really easy to do. So let's get those ironed on and then we'll show you how to start sewing them together. Now that we have our squares where we want them, we need to get them to stick to our grid. And the way we're going to do that is by taking our iron and pressing down for about 2 or 3 seconds in all the different areas and just kind of working our way all over our grid. What we want to make sure is that we're pressing and not ironing. So ironing is when we move our iron like this, and pressing is we're going straight up and down. And that will help us keep from moving our squares or shuffling them over and sticking our iron to our grid. So we're just going to continue to do that all over our grid until they're all stuck. So here I have a panel that I have finished ironing, and as you can see they are all stuck to my interfacing now. And so what we're going to do is actually take it over to the sewing machine and we're going to fold this side over and we're going to sew a 1/4-inch seam down that edge. We'll keep doing that. We'll take the next seam, we'll fold it over, and we'll sew a 1/4-inch seam down that one as well. And we'll just keep working our way across the panel until we get to the other side. Okay, so we're here at the sewing machine, and I want to comment that you need to make sure that you have a good foot for making a nice 1/4-inch seam. And then just like I said before, we're going to take and fold over our first edge, and we're going to put it under our foot. I'm going to backstitch just a bit, and then we're going to sew right down the edge of that line. And then I will backstitch at the other side. We'll cut it loose, and then we're going to do that all the way across. Okay, so after you get done sewing all of those vertical lines, then you're going to take it over to your ironing board and actually iron it out as flat as you can get it. Before the next step, we need to make sure that we come in here and we actually take and clip all of the seams in between those blocks all the way down those lines that you sewed vertically. That's going to allow our fabric to nest. So make sure that you don't cut through the seams that you just sewn, but you want to clip up to that, and that'll allow us to come back and nest those seams. Okay, so we went through and nipped all of those seams down that line, and the reason we did that is because now when we go back to sew our strips together the other direction, we're going to fold over our piece, and then what we want to make sure of is right here that our fabric is going one direction on the top and then the other direction on the bottom. And so we're going to do that all the way down. So as I'm getting close to the next seam, I'm just going to make sure that for this strip, the top is leaning in and then the bottom is coming back at me. And we're going to do that for each one of those, all the way down the line. All right, now I am ready to start going down my second strip. And you can see here, to make this seam lay flat, on top, now this top one has to be facing towards me, and that means that on the bottom it needs to be facing towards the back of the sewing machine. So on the second row, the top will be facing towards me and the bottom will be facing towards the back of the sewing machine. And we're going to go down that line just like we did before, and we'll work our way across the entire panel. So when we bring it back over to the pressing mat after we have sewn both vertically and horizontally, you can see it's pretty curled up. And so we're going to take and just lay our seams as flat as we can. And start here in the middle. And we're going to press it out, and that way it's nice and flat for the next step. So just like that, we have our top pieced, and we're ready to start layering it together and getting it bound. So for my project, you could easily meander all over this. But for those of you that are new, maybe that's a little bit more intimidating. So I thought I would just sew straight lines kind of diagonally across my blocks. I want to comment that we don't want to try to sew through the middle where we have pieced these four corners. It's really thick, and I think it'll be a little bit hard on your machines. So what I did is just took in from each diagonal, I lined my ruler up, and about 3/4 of an inch to either side of that diagonal. So just laid my ruler here along the diagonal of each one of these strips, and then I moved over about 3/4 of an inch. And then I used one of these pins, that will erase using heat or an iron. And that way we can draw right on the top of our quilt top. And we'll do that on each one. So then I'll move over to the next one, and I'll measure over about 3/4 of an inch from that edge. So now, after I have drawn my lines down diagonally across, I wanted to show you here that you could see it. So we will layer it together, and then I'll take it over to the machine, and I'm actually going to sew right down those diagonal lines, and I'll draw them all the way across this top, and that's what we'll use to quilt our placemats together. Alright, so we're ready to start sandwiching this together, and as you can see, we have our back fabric, and then we have a piece of batting, and then we have the top laid on it. And what we'll need to do is to hold this together, you can either use straight pins or safety pins. You're just going to put a few throughout so that you have a way to hold this together, and you'll just put them kind of all over. Get that all pinned together, and then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to sew right down these diagonal lines. Then we'll come back and we'll lay our diagonal lines the other way and sew through those as well. Okay, so here we have it back at the sewing machine, and we're ready to sew those diagonal lines across our placemat. I wanted to comment that I'm kind of starting in the middle, one of the middle lines, and we're going to sew it, and then we're going to kind of just keep working our way from the inside out, and that'll keep it from bunching on the back. So we're going to go through and sew down all of those lines, and then we'll come back and be ready to go the other direction. As you get close to pins, you just may have to kind of move them out of the way. Alright, so I've sewn my diagonals going the one direction, and I'm just going to come in here and press this, and that will get rid of the marks that I just made. So we're just going to make sure and heat all of those lines really well, and that will get rid of that mark that we created. And then what we'll do is we'll draw our lines in the opposite direction, and we'll do the exact same thing. Now that we have the top part quilted to the back, what we need to do is square this up so that we have nice clean edges to attach our binding. And we're just going to lay our ruler on top, nice long ruler so we can cut all the way across. And we're just going to try to keep some of these lines here in the middle lined up with our ruler, and that way we'll have a nice square placemat when we're done. Then we will turn and lay our ruler against the edge that we just created. Try to line it up, and we'll keep cutting all the way around. Now our placemat is ready for the binding. Now that we have our placemat sandwiched together, we need to create the binding that we'll use to finish off the edges. There's lots of ways to make binding. I'm going to show you an easy way for those of you that are new to sewing. Right now we have our 2.5-inch strips, and we're going to lay our strips right sides together and have them perpendicular to each other. Alright, so then the easiest thing to do is to actually take your ruler and lay it across the diagonal of those two strips, and we're going to draw us a line. And that line is where we're going to sew these two strips together. So I'm just going to take a couple of pins and use that to hold my strip together until I can get it over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew right down that diagonal. Alright, we're back at our sewing machine, and I'm just going to take and place this under my foot and get that laid out straight, and we're going to sew straight across that diagonal. And we're going to remove our pins as we come across them. Okay, so here we're back at the cutting mat real quick, and we're going to take and just trim off this edge using a ruler, and we like to leave it about 1/4 inch, so I'm laying the 1/4 inch mark of my ruler on that line that I sewed, and then we can just chop off that outside edge. That way, when we are done, we have a strip with this diagonal line, and what that does is it helps it not be such a bulk in our seam, and it looks a lot cleaner. So instead of sewing straight up and down, we like to sew this diagonal to make a nice bias strip. So after we sew the two strips of our binding together, we need to come over here and finish making the strips. So what I'm going to show you, we're going to take and iron this flat, and then you'll want to open up this seam. And I've actually done it on this other strip so I can show you. So I've laid it flat, and we've opened up that seam. So we just took the iron, opened it up, and there we have it ready for the next step. To finish this off and get it ready to attach to our placemats, we're just going to fold these raw edges together, and then we're going to press it along the long side. And we're going to do that all the way down the strip. That way we have our raw edges together, and then we have our finished edge, and that's how we'll finish off our placemat's edge. Now that we have our placemat squared up and our binding strips made, we're ready to attach the binding strip to the placemat. So here we have the front side, but we're actually going to take our binding strip and attach to the back side of our placemat. So I'm going to flip that over, and then for this first bit, what we need to do is make sure and leave ourselves a good tail so that when we get back to the other side, we'll have plenty of room to attach the two pieces together. And then for this first little piece, we're just going to sew from this pin over to this other pin, and I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch in from this edge, and that'll help me get some room to make that corner. So when I'm done sewing, I'll come back and I'll show you how to turn that corner. Alright, now that we have sewn that little piece on that first edge, we're ready to turn our corner. And we have to give ourselves enough room to take this fabric and pull it around to the front side to finish after we've sewn it one time. So this is the way I like to do it. Of course, there's other ways to do it as well. But I take and I fold this piece up, and we like for the edge of our fabric and our binding strip to be in line. So you're going to fold it up like that, and then you're going to fold it back towards yourself. And when you fold it back, it should be pretty much in line with that top edge going this other way. So I'm going to show you one more time. So we're going to take and flip it away from ourselves, and then that binding should be in the same line as our edge of our placemat. And then we're going to bring it back towards us, and now that should be in line with the top edge of our placemat. So we'll pin that in place. And on this one, we're actually going to start here on the edge of the fabric, maybe in a little bit and then backstitch to the edge. And then we're going to go all the way down. And when we get to the bottom, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to stop about 1/4 inch from that bottom edge. So I'm starting on the fabric just a little bit, and I'm going to backstitch to the edge, and then we're going to go forward. Till we get to the other end. So we'll keep sewing down that line, and again we're going to stop about 1/4 inch from the edge, and that'll allow us to turn that corner. So we're going to do that for the other 2 corners. Okay, so I've made it back around, and I wanted to show you here that on the other side I did just a short seam again, so that leaves us plenty of room to come in here and get these 2 pieces connected correctly. So here's how I like to do this. So I lay one side down, and I'm going to cut the tail off of that one side, and that way we have a distance to mark so that we know where to cut the other side off. So it really is 2.5 inches difference, but that's the distance of that strip. So there we have that top one. So I'm going to show you one more time. So I cut the tail end off of this one, laid that bottom flat. We're going to open up that bias strip, and then we'll lay this top one on top of that little sandwich. We're going to cut off this edge. And that way, when we get this sewn on the diagonal, just like we did before, they're going to fit together great. So we'll take this bottom one, and this is where I wanted to leave a little bit of space, because we'll open this up and kind of crinkle that down. So we'll open that piece up. We're going to need to put right sides together, and then we'll take and make sure that you don't have this twisted, and we're going to take and open the other side as well. So that way we can put a pin through these pieces to keep them open for us. All right, so we're just going to take and from the corner of that back strip and from this corner, get them laid it together pretty good, we're going to take and just draw a diagonal line across those 2. Try to get them as straight as you can. This is the harder piece of this. Okay, so we're just going to draw that diagonal again, and we're going to sew across that diagonal. All right, now we're just going to take and remove those pins that were kind of holding it together, and we're just going to trim off this outer edge. About 1/4 inch from that seam that we just sewed down. And that way, when we open these back up, it lays perfectly against the outside. So we're going to go through and press our seams the way we did the first time, and then we'll lay it against our placemat, and we'll sew that 1/4 inch to finish off the binding for this side. Now that we've sewn all the way around our placemat, we are ready to fold this over to the front. And then we're going to use pins or quilting clips and hold this down. That way we can sew all the way around at one time. So here on the corner, what we'd like to do is you're going to keep it straight on one edge, and then you're going to take your other one and pull over and create a nice little mitered corner. Stick a pin through that to hold it in place, and we'll do that all the way around our placemat, and that will be our finishing touch. All right, I have pinned all the way around my placemat, and we're going to take it back to the sewing machine and give it one more time around, and we'll be finished with our project. So I'm going to show you one of my secrets to making really nice binding, and that is the bi-level foot. And on the back side of the bi-level foot is a little bitty ledge, and your fabric rides right up against it and keeps it from slipping, and we get nice straight edges on our binding. So I have my bi-level foot on and I've got my placemat under my foot. There's a notch here on the front of my foot and I'm going to keep that in line with my fabric, and that's how I'll keep right on this edge. I've moved my needle all the way to the left so it'll just catch the edge of this binding and give us a nice finish. And we'll do that all the way around. So we've come to our first corner. I'm going to pull my pin out and just keep my fingers on my two pieces here, and we're going to just keep walking forward, making sure to catch that other direction underneath my foot, and we'll keep walking forward till we're about over that mitered corner, and then we'll turn it and it should line up pretty good the other direction right here with my fabric lined up with that little mark on my foot, and then we're going to keep going down that side. And so we'll do that for each of our corners. Right, we made it all the way back around. We're going to back stitch to reinforce our stitches and cut it loose. There we have our placemat finished. And just like that, our easy placemats are finished. What a great project for beginners. You learned everything from piecing the front to attaching the binding. It was great having you here with us this afternoon. Thank you for letting us help you turn your inspiration into a creation.